Hello, Year 11 Maths General students, and welcome to Exercise 2F, which is shares and dividends. Now, if you've ever heard either of those words, you know that they have something to do with the stock market. Now, today's lesson is not going to be about how to invest in the stock market or about giving investment advice. Instead, it's just about what sort of calculations do we do around shares and dividends. So let's take a look first at the definition for a share. So a share is a unit of ownership in a company. All shares are worth the same amount as each other, and they entitle their owner to a claim on the company's profits as well. So an example is if there are 100 shares in a company and you own 20 of those, then you own 20 out of 100 of the shares, so 20% of the shares, and therefore you own 20% of the company as well. This in turn entitles you to 20% of the profits made by the company as well. So whatever percentage of a company you own via shares, you're entitled to that percentage of profit as well. So let's take a look at this example quickly. Richard owns 25 shares of the Carnes Construction Company, and in total there are 500 shares. So part A asks us, what percentage of the company does Richard own? So Richard's percentage is this. He owns 25 out of 500, so that's a fraction. And now we turn that into a percentage by multiplying by 100. So 25 over 500 times 100% is 5%. So therefore, Richard owns 5% of the company. Now, B asks, if the company declares this profit, $780,000, how much profit is Richard entitled to? So like we saw in the previous slide, if you own 10% of a company, for example, you are entitled to 10% of the profit. Whatever percentage it is you own, that's the percentage of profit you're entitled to as well. So in this case, Richard owns 5% of the company from part A. So that means Richard is entitled to 0.05 times $780,000. So 5% of the company's profits. And the answer here is $39,000. So for that year, Richard is entitled to $39,000 of profit from the company. Now, just knowing how much profit you are entitled to from a share doesn't actually tell us whether it's a good investment or not, because that doesn't take into account how much was paid for the share in the first place. So in order to actually evaluate how worthwhile an investment is, we use what's called the price to earnings ratio. So price to earnings ratio is calculated like this. It's equal to the market share price per, and what that means is the cost for one share. So the cost of one share is the market price. And we divide that by the annual earnings per share. The lower this ratio is, the better investment a stock has been. So the reason for that is, in layman's terms, it's actually saying to us, how much do I pay to get $1 of earnings from my shares? So how much money do I put in to get $1 worth of earnings? So the reason why a lower number is better there is, obviously, if I pay $10 and I get $1 of earnings, that's better than paying $20 and getting $1 worth of earnings. So the lower the price to earnings ratio, the better. Let's take a look at this example now. We have two companies, Company A and Company B, and Company A has a market price of $20 and a earnings per share of $1.85. The reason that number is smaller than the $20 is that's just a per year thing. So you invest the $20 once, and then after a year, you'll get $1.85 back, because that's your share of their earnings, and then another $1.85 the next year, and so on and so forth. So eventually, that $20 investment will pay for itself. It obviously won't pay for itself very quickly, though. Now, shares in Company B, they have a market price of $50, and their earnings per share is $3.30. So we want to know, what is the price to earnings ratio for both companies in that time period? So let's do them both separately. So Company A's price to earnings ratio, which we can write as PE ratio, it's equal to the market price, so that's the price per share, divided by the earnings per share. So for Company A, that is $20 divided by $1.85. And let's see what we get there. 20 divided 1.85 is, to one decimal place, because that's what the question is asked for, it's 10.8. So the PE ratio for Company A is 10.8. Now Company B has a PE ratio that's calculated in the same way. PE ratio, it is the price over the earnings. That's why it's called PE ratio, price to earnings. So price, in this case, for Company B, it's $50 for a share, and the earnings are $3.30 per share. So now we have to calculate 50 divided by 3.3. And the answer here is, to round it to one decimal place, sorry, is 15.2. Alrighty. So the PE ratio of company A is 10.8, and for company B is 15.2. That's part A complete. Now part B says which shares have been a better investment. Now, like I said before, we'll know it's a better investment if we have the lowest PE ratio. So company A is therefore the better investment because its PE ratio says for every $10.80 that I invested, I get $1 out. Whereas for company B, I had to invest $15.20 to get $1 out. So the lower that number is, the better. So company A, better investment. Alrighty. Now, before we were saying, if you own 10% of a company, you're entitled to 10% of its profits. In practice, however, most companies don't actually share their profits that way. Instead, the funds are invested back into the company to therefore make it a richer company and to earn more for the shareholders later on. So, for example, if a company is publicly traded, that might mean all of its shares are out in the public, which would mean all of its profit is entitled to members of the public. And therefore, the company itself would collect no profit in order to enhance itself. So because of that, not all of the profit is actually given out as it is entitled to people. Instead, they pay some portion of this entitlement, and we call that the dividend. So the dividend is the actual payment people receive. They don't always receive the percentage that they're entitled to. So a dividend, it's measured in the number of dollars you receive per share that you have. So for example, a dividend might be 15 cents per share. So if I have 2 shares, I get 30 cents. That's what a dividend is. Now, dividend yield is the dividend as a percentage of share price. So that means dividend over share price and then times by 100%. So let's take a look at a question that uses dividends. So Miller has 3,000 shares in Alphabet Childcare Centers. So he owns 3,000 shares. We don't know how many shares the company has in total, so we're not looking at what percentage is he entitled to or anything like that. The current market price of the shares is $3.50, and the company has recently paid a dividend of 40 cents per share. So part A says, how much does Miller receive in dividends in total? So his payment is going to be equal to the number of shares he owns, the 3,000 shares, multiplied by the dividend payment that they're making. And here it says they're making $3.50 each. Oh, sorry, that's the market price of the shares. They're paying a dividend of 40 cents per share. So that means it's 3,000 shares times 40 cents per share. So 3,000 times 0.4. So 3,000 times 0.4 is $1,200. So he gets 40 cents per share. He owns 3,000 of them, so he gets $1,200. Now B asks, what is the percentage dividend yield for this share? So we use the formula from the previous slide, and because it's new, I've embedded it on the slide here for us to look at. So the dividend yield, it's equal to the dividend that you receive per share divided by the share price. And you multiply that by 100%. So the dividend is 40 cents per share, so 0.4, and the share price is $3.50, so 3.5, and we multiply that by 100%. So 40 cents per share divided by the $3.50 cost per share, multiplied by 100%. And I just want one decimal in my answer, so I'm rounding. My answer is 11.4%.